Jeff Bezos, as you know, founder of Amazon. And the background on his story is that in 1994, he wants to jump into the internet game. And so in this interview, and the interview that you're about to hear a clip from is an interview that he gave in 2001. And it was for a nonprofit called the Academy of Achievement. And he was talking about lessons that he had learned in courage. And so he's setting the table about a conversation that he's going to have with his boss in 1994, where he's going to explain to his boss that he's planning on quitting this big job to start a virtual bookstore. Let's take a listen.
I went to my boss and said to him, I'm going to go do this crazy thing, and I'm going to start this company selling books online. And the conclusion of that was this. He said, this actually sounds like a really good idea to me, but it sounds like it would be a better idea for somebody who didn't already have a good job. And he convinced me to think about it for 48 hours before making a final decision. And so I went away and was trying to find the right framework in which to make that kind of big decision.
And that brings us to the second question that determines who you truly are. And I'm going to add a little bit to it. And it also helps you determine what you truly want, because sometimes it's not so obvious. And so he goes away for 48 hours and he's in search of this framework that's going to help him make this huge life-changing decision. And in the interview, he explains that, and these are his words, not mine, only a nerd would call it this, but he starts calling this framework, which is basically a question, the regret minimization framework. And the basic premise of it is to make decisions in a way to minimize the number of regrets that you're going to have when you're 80 years old. And so let's go back to this interview where Jeff is explaining what the regret minimization framework is and the question he asked himself.
So I wanted to project myself forward to age 80 and say, okay, now I'm looking back on my life. I want to have minimized the number of regrets I have. And I knew that when I was 80, I was not going to regret having tried this. I was not going to regret having trying to participate in this thing called the internet that I thought was going to be a really big deal. I knew that if I failed, I wouldn't regret that. But I knew the one thing I might regret is not ever having tried. And I knew that that would haunt me every day. And so when I thought about it that way, it was an incredibly easy decision.
What I love about this is that he's using this commitment to minimize regrets as a way to ask himself a question. And the question is basically, project yourself out to the age of 80 and ask, what will I think at that time? And he then explains the benefit of going out into the distance and asking yourself, what will I think about taking this risk, whether I fail, whether I succeed at the time when I'm 80?
It gets you away from some of the daily pieces of confusion. I left this Wall Street firm in the middle of the year. When you do that, you walk away from your annual bonus. And that's the kind of thing that in the short term can confuse you. But if you think about the long term, then you can really make good life decisions that you won't regret later.
I love this. Because to put this in context, if you don't work on Wall Street, the thing to know about that bonus that he was walking away from is for most people, that is the majority of your compensation for the entire year. And he said it can confuse you. I think it can determine your decision. You make the decision based on what's going to happen in the next 6 months, and you forget about the long range impact of how you will feel about that decision way later down the road when you're 80 years old. And after watching that interview, I was so curious to see if he spoke any more about this that I could only find one other interview online. It was 18 years later. And in this one, he is on a stage at an event called Summit Co. And he happens to be talking to his brother about lessons in success. And he's reflecting back on this moment in his life and using the regret minimization framework to make this decision. And he had this insight about the nature of regrets that I wanted to share with you.
In most cases, our biggest regrets turn out to be acts of omission. It's paths not taken, and they haunt us. We wonder, what would have happened? I loved that person, and I never told them. And then they married somebody else. I didn't do this. And so that's the frame of mind that I put myself in. And once I did that, once I thought about it that way, it was immediately obvious to me. I knew that when I'm 80, I would never regret trying this thing that I was super excited about and failing.
And that's why this second question determines who you really are and what you really want. If I put myself at the age of 80, what am I going to think about this decision then? Am I going to regret not doing it? And what's interesting about this question is it does help you remove all of the things that you're scared of that are right in front of you right now, immediately in your vision. And it helps you think long term and tap into what your heart truly wants. That thing that you know to be true that oftentimes you're scared to listen to. And it actually really works. I've referred to this before as time traveling. When you time travel ahead in your life, and then you look backwards, things tend to make sense in a way that they don't when you're standing in the middle of it. And it gives you this sense of perspective that has wisdom that you can use in the present moment. And it works because I've felt this way. You know, when I've asked my question at various times in my life, like, for example, when we moved to Vermont, am I going to regret not doing something that really supports Oakley at this moment in his life? Yes, I would regret not doing that. And so we moved. I felt that way when I started this podcast. Would I regret not doing it? Even though it was a big risk, even though I was going to have to shut down parts of the business that were very successful to find the time to do this, even if it failed, I knew I would regret not doing it. And then all of a sudden, all the obstacles just become not barriers to doing it, but things you need to figure out. And you know what else? I felt this way when I quit my job as a lawyer in 1999. See, I hated that job, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was so intrigued by the internet that I quit my job as a lawyer and I jumped right into that first .com bubble in 1999. And you want to know something? I wasn't successful. I went from job to job to job to job. I was lost and changing my career and had no direction. I was just like throwing darts at the wall, for crying out loud, trying to figure out my next move for 14 years. 14 years. But I'll tell you what, even though I didn't succeed, like it wasn't like I jumped into a startup that became Amazon and I found my calling. I definitely didn't fail. And I know if I had stayed in that job and just soldiered on, I would have looked back on that moment and regretted it for the rest of my life. And I tell you that because you don't regret the things that you failed at, because you're proud of yourself for trying. And that's exactly what Jeff Bezos reflected on at the end of that interview in 2019.
I would be very proud of the fact when I'm 80 that I tried. And I also knew that it would always haunt me if I didn't try. And so that would be a regret. It would be a 100% chance of a regret if I didn't try, and basically a 0% chance of regret if I tried and failed.
I just love this. I love this question. Just think about yourself at the age of 80 and now look back on this decision you need to make. And your job is to make a decision that you will not regret. There is a 100% chance that you will regret not trying. You will regret not taking a risk. You will regret not placing a bet on yourself or following your heart. And you want to know what else is true? there's 100% chance you will be proud of yourself if you find the courage to take the risk. I have 3 questions that I am going to share with you, and we are going to use these questions as a way for you to tap into and unearth your greatest self.